Florence Welch just made her best album in a decade, and the reason it's getting attention should make us all deeply uncomfortable. This album's getting more attention, more think pieces, more cultural conversation than anything Florence has released in nearly a decade. The Guardian, the lost pregnancy that nearly killed her. Rolling Stone fights trauma with a primal scream. The New Yorker confronts real-life horror with gothic fury. Consequence of Sound, brutal honesty and cathartic transformations. Every major publication led with the trauma, not the music, not the artistic evolution, but the suffering. And that's the problem. I'm James, and this is Trendy Pop. And for the next 10 minutes, we're going to talk about why women's trauma has become currency in pop music, and why Florence Welch's latest album is both a masterpiece and evidence of something deeply broken in how we consume art. But first, let's talk about the actual music, because it's genuinely stunning. The title track, Everybody Scream, opens with this dark, up-tempo euphoria. Brutal subject matter, wrapped in something that almost feels celebratory. The backing vocals sound like the climax of The Witch. You know, that Robert Eggers film where the coven gathers in the woods at the end? There's this pulsing, almost tribal rhythm underneath. Drums that feel ceremonial. It's not subtle. Florence isn't interested in subtlety anymore. And immediately you know this is different. This isn't mystical Florence. This isn't romantic Florence. This is feral Florence. One of the greats hits next with this raw, organic electric guitar riff and a free tempo that feels genuinely jarring. Everything nowadays is auto-tuned and quantized to perfection. So hearing something that breathes and moves like a living thing is almost shocking. The guitar tone is gritty, almost garage rock. Florence's vocal delivery matches it. Notes that crack slightly, vibrato that wavers, moments where she's clearly at the absolute edge of her range. Too feminine to function, she says. That line isn't throwaway. That's the thesis of the entire album. Femininity is malfunction. Femininity is something that needs to be fixed, corrected, managed. Hit subscribe for more unfiltered pop opinions. Witch Dance is where Florence fully commits to the chaos. Sex, rejection, persecution, finding your coven. The rhythm section is frantic, almost manic, and the vocal melody refuses to settle into anything predictable. She's jumping octaves, switching between breathy whispers and full-throated wails within the same verse. There's a moment midway through where everything drops out except percussion and her voice. It feels ancient. Like you've stumbled into a ritual you weren't supposed to witness, and then the full band crashes back in. She offers the choice, gin or tonic or lithium on the track. The choice between numbing yourself socially or medically. It's darkly funny and devastating at once. But here's where I have to stop and tell you about Sympathy Magic. This track is an absolute banger. The verse production is relatively restrained. Steady beat, arpeggiated synths, Florence's vocals sitting right there in the pocket, but she's building tension the entire time. Adding layers of backing vocals, introducing new instrumental elements, gradually increasing the intensity. And then the chorus hits. So come on, tear me wide open, she sings. The drums explode into this pounding, almost industrial beat. The synths go from delicate to massive. Florence is belting at the top of her range with at least 4 or 5 harmonic layers, creating this wall of voice. It's bombastic, it's theatrical, it's exactly what a Florence chorus should be. But here's the brilliant part. After the second chorus, when you think the song is going to plateau at that level of intensity, the synths kick in for a final climax that somehow goes even bigger. It's sheer cathartic release. You're not thinking anymore, you're just feeling. And then the entire track drops out, one single scream, and you're left with this beautiful, shimmering, arpeggiated, delicate soundscape, just crystalline synths in space. It's the sonic equivalent of emotional purging. That's sophisticated pop production, understanding dynamics and knowing exactly when to pull back to make the silence hit as hard as the noise. Perfume and Milk is almost feral. I know everyone makes this cliche, but I genuinely thought of Stevie Nicks when I was listening to this song, specifically the song Sisters of the Moon from the Fleetwood Mac Tusk album. Nature, flora, fauna, witchcraft is connection to something primal. The percussion throughout has this earthy quality, like it's being played on found objects rather than a standard kit. The whole thing feels improvised and mystical. Miracles are often inconvenient, and a prayer is a spell, she says. Think about that line for a second. Miracles disrupt your life. Spiritual practice is just ritualized intention. It sounds simple until you actually sit with it. Buckle is up next, and it has this very Swiftian specificity. The detail of a belt buckle, the casual cruelty of modern neglect. Casually cruel. I didn't even realize. The production strips back to simple guitar, and Florence's vocal is close mic'd, almost whispered in places. You can hear the breath between phrases. Modern pop usually smooths all of that stuff out, but here it really makes you lean in. A crowd of thousands came to see me, but you couldn't reply for 3 days, she says. You're famous enough to perform for thousands, but not enough for a text back. That's a very 2020s form of heartbreak. Kraken plays on the word cracking, with the Kraken being a Norwegian sea monster. The euphoric harmonies over a driving, pulsing chorus. She stretches the word, breaks it apart, and makes it sound like an actual act of breaking. All of my peers, they had so much potential, but the swamp, it took them down, she says. Not failure, not giving up, just being pulled under by something you can't escape. So good looking, it's obscene. I put my fist into my mouth and scream, she sings at one point. And that line is delivered almost matter-of-factly, which makes it hit even harder. The production is pretty simple, and it trusts the lyric to do the work. The lyric and the performance, I should say. Now, we need to talk about the old religion, not just because it contains a Buffy the Vampire Slayer reference, though that obviously helps. Florence told an interviewer she'd been binging Buffy while writing this album, and you can hear it. It's your troubled hero back for season 6, she says. She did say at one point, actually, in an interview I saw with Zane Lowe, that the album was almost called season 6. And if you know Buffy, you know season 6 is the darkest season. Buffy literally claws her way out of her own grave in season 6. Depression, trauma, self-destruction masked as empowerment. The production on this track is dark and moody, atmospheric. There's reverb, heavy vocals, minimal instrumentation in the verses, and a slow build that never quite explodes. It feels like something emerging from underground. Give me something I can crush. Give me something I can kill, she wails. This isn't metaphorical. This is someone looking for a physical outlet for overwhelming emotion. And the album does lose a little bit of steam towards the end, but that doesn't mean that the songs become meaningless. Drink Deep feels like a medieval death march, complete with wailing harmonies. The pounding drums have this really oppressive weight to them. I drank of myself. Yes, it came from me. Still, I drank deep, she sings. But then music by men arrives, and the album gets really revealing at this point. More revealing, I should say. Florence is in a car with her boyfriend, also a musician, listening to his demos, and she slides down in her seat. She makes herself smaller so that he can enjoy his moment more fully. The production here is really stripped down. Guitar-driven, raw. It actually reminds me of, some people might crucify me for making this comparison, but it really reminds me of a track from Kelly Clarkson's album, My December, the track Irvine. It's just simplicity, very emotionally impactful and meaningful. If you haven't listened to My December, check it out. You have a bigger ego than you think you do, she says about this man. And then this line, let me put out a record and let it not ruin my life. Let's pause because we need to talk about that. Because Florence Welch doesn't seem comfortable in the spotlight when it comes to promotion. Watch her in interviews about this album. She's anxious, almost out of place, like she'd rather let the work speak for itself. She's sat there wringing her hands and playing with her fingers. And here's the thing that she's getting at. Men don't have to explain their art in the way that women do. Men release albums and that's it. We take it as it's presented. Women often have to contextualize, justify, explain, perform their trauma for public consumption. And when that makes you uncomfortable, when you're being asked to metabolize your pain into digestible content for the gram, that's a particular kind of violence. The man she was with at the time, Felix White from the Maccabees. His new band is called 86 TVs. Those demos she's talking about, those are probably for their debut album. She made herself smaller for his ego. She's admitting that on this record. You Can Have It All is the track that most directly addresses the miscarriage Florence experienced during a performance. Dark, intense verses building to a cathartic, wailing chorus. The production builds tension deliberately, starting very sparse, adding layers until the chorus hits with the full emotional weight. Am I a woman now? She asks. That line really destroyed me because she's interrogating this idea that women aren't really women until they become mothers. And when motherhood is violently taken from you in the most public way possible during a show in front of an audience, what does that make you? Florence Welch's voice throughout this album is astounding. Her incredibly powerful and tight vibrato, the hushed vulnerability. She commits everything to the performance. And this is a compelling album. It's captivating. It's some of her best work in years. And here's where I need to circle back to those numbers from the beginning. How Big, How Blue, How Beautiful sold 137,000 copies in its first week in the US. High as Hope sold 84,000. Dance Fever debuted at number 7. And Everybody Scream, 56,000 copies, and it charted at number 4. This is her lowest selling album in over a decade in America. And yet it's getting more cultural attention than anything she's released since 2015. Why is that? Because we know the story. Because we know about this miscarriage, this trauma. Don't believe me? Look at how the press covered this album. The Guardian, the lost pregnancy that nearly killed her. Rolling Stone fights trauma with a primal scream. The New Yorker confronts real-life horror with gothic fury. Consequence of Sound, brutal honesty and cathartic transformations. Every major publication led with the trauma, not the music, not the artistic evolution, but the suffering. And here's the thing, these are thoughtful, well-written reviews. The critics genuinely engage with the album, but the framing, the headlines, the way the album is being sold to readers, it's all through the lens of what Florence went through to make it. Men don't get this treatment. When Nick Cave releases an album about grief, the headline isn't Nick Cave Fights Trauma, it's Nick Cave's latest masterwork, or a meditation on loss. The trauma might be discussed, but it's not the selling point. For Florence, the trauma is the selling point. And that's what makes this so uncomfortable, because the album itself hasn't changed. The music is the music, but the narrative around it, the miscarriage, the near-death experience, the relationship where she had to make herself smaller, that's what's driving engagement. That's what makes it newsworthy. Women's art, or at the very least Florence's art, needs to be baptized in trauma to be taken seriously. Ceremonials was a masterpiece. How Big, How Blue, How Beautiful had some of her best vocal performances ever. Those albums didn't have a story of public suffering attached, so they felt less urgent, less worthy of sustained attention. Here's what really bothers me. I don't know if I'm responding to the quality of the music or the story behind it, and I don't think I'm alone in that. Women's art seems to need trauma as credentials, and that creates this perverse incentive where women's pain becomes content, becomes marketable, becomes something we consume and discuss and analyze. Florence clearly doesn't want to be doing press for this album. She doesn't want to explain herself. She doesn't want to package her miscarriage into sound bites for YouTube thumbnails, which is exactly what I'm doing right now, by the way. I'm aware of the irony, but she has to, because the industry demands it. Because the algorithm demands it. Because we, the audience, apparently need context to care. Men release albums and we discuss the music. Women release albums and we discuss what they went through to make the music. I don't have a solution for this. I don't know how to reconcile the fact that I'm more engaged with Everybody Scream because I know of Florence's suffering. I don't know if that makes me complicit in a system that requires women to publicly bleed for our entertainment. What I do know is that Florence Welch has created something genuinely compelling here. The album works. It's powerful. It's moving. It's some of the best music she's ever made. But the fact that it's getting attention now with 56,000 first week sales, while How Big, How Blue, How Beautiful sold more than double that and faded from the conversation faster, that tells us something really uncomfortable about how we value women's art. And maybe we need to sit with that discomfort instead of rushing past it. According to Metacritic, Everybody Scream received universal acclaim with a score of 85 out of 100. Critics praised Welch's presentation of the brutal, ugly, and raw sides of femininity. The album debuted at number 1 in the UK, her 5th chart topper in the UK, but with declining US sales compared to her previous work. So here's where I land. Florence Welch made a masterpiece, but I wish she didn't have to nearly die for us to pay attention to it. I wish the album could speak for itself without the trauma narrative driving every headline. I wish Ceremonials and How Big, How Blue, How Beautiful had received this level of sustained critical conversation without requiring public suffering as the price of admission. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is about. Not whether Everybody Scream is good, it is, but whether we're capable of valuing women's art without requiring them to bleed for it first. I don't think we are. Not yet, at least. And that's the most uncomfortable truth of all. I'm James, and this is Trendy Pop, and I genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. Are we complicit in this system? Can we do better? Or is this just how it works now? Let me know what you think, and I'll catch you next time.